Adrian Cole had never been a man who bowed to pressure. At 33, the young CEO of Cole Enterprises was known for his unflinching decisions, his cool demeanor, and his unbreakable will. The business pages called him ruthless, the board respected him, and his competitors feared him. But in the private corners of his life, Adrian was still the son of a powerful family, a family that carried its own burdens, traditions, and obligations. And tonight, one of those obligations was about to shackle him. The ballroom of the Cole estate gleamed with golden chandeliers and endless silk drapes. Guests from every powerful circle were gathered, their eyes sweeping between two figures at the altar: Adrian, in a tailored black suit, and Evelyn Hart, the daughter of a longtime ally of the Coles. The marriage had been arranged. Adrian had argued, resisted, even threatened to walk away. But the merger between their families' businesses required this union, his father had said. The stability of Cole Enterprises depended on it. Breaking the deal would mean millions lost, years of negotiation wasted, and enemies waiting to pounce. He looked at Evelyn now, standing across from him in a gown that sparkled like morning frost. She wasn't someone he hated. In fact, he barely knew her at all. They had spoken only twice before the wedding, both conversations stiff and polite. She was beautiful. There was no denying that, but Adrian had never cared about beauty alone. He cared about freedom, about choosing his own path. And tonight, that freedom was being signed away. Evelyn's eyes, a shade of hazel that caught the candlelight, were unreadable. She didn't look thrilled either. She stood with perfect posture, her hands folded over a small bouquet of white roses, her expression calm, but distant. Adrian wondered what she was thinking. Was she angry, sad, or simply resigned? When the vows were spoken, Adrian's voice was clipped, controlled. Evelyn's was soft, almost trembling, but steady enough to fulfill her role. The guests erupted in applause, champagne glasses clinked, and the families smiled. It was done. The marriage was sealed. But for Adrian, it felt less like a beginning and more like a cage closing. Later that night, after hours of forced laughter, toasts, and photographs, Adrian retreated to the bridal suite. He removed his jacket and tossed it on a chair, loosening his tie as if it were strangling him. The room was lavish. Red roses scattered on the bed, champagne on ice, candles flickering on every surface. A carefully staged scene of romance. But it only made him feel more suffocated. The door opened, and Evelyn stepped inside. She had changed into a lighter dress, elegant yet simple, her hair falling in soft waves down her shoulders. She closed the door quietly behind her, as though entering an unfamiliar place. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Adrian finally spoke, his tone blunt. "I suppose congratulations are in order. We survived the circus." Evelyn gave him a faint, dry smile. "Barely." He studied her, surprised by the hint of sarcasm in her voice. She didn't sound like the docile bride he expected. "You don't look happy," he said. "Neither do you," she replied, her gaze meeting his without hesitation. That startled him. Most people shrank under his stare, but Evelyn held it, steady and unflinching. For the first time that day, Adrian felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. He poured himself a glass of champagne, then offered her one. She hesitated before accepting. They drank in silence. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, her voice quieter. "You didn't want this marriage, did you?" Adrian let out a short laugh, sharp and bitter. "Did you?" She looked away, her lips pressing together. "No, but I didn't have much a choice." "Neither did I," Adrian said flatly. Their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of two people trapped by forces bigger than themselves. For the first time that night, Adrian saw her not as a stranger, not as a pawn in his family's game, but as another prisoner in the same cage. As the hours slipped by, they talked. At first, it was small things, casual remarks about the wedding, the guests, the exhausting expectations. But slowly, the conversation deepened. Evelyn told him about her childhood, about growing up under the shadow of her powerful father, about always being reminded that her worth was measured by how useful she was to the family. She admitted she loved painting, but her father dismissed it as a distraction. Adrian listened, leaning back in his chair, realizing how little he actually knew about her. He had assumed she was delicate, reserved, maybe even spoiled. But behind her calm exterior, There was fire. A quiet rebellion. In return, he told her things he rarely admitted to anyone, that he hated being called ruthless, that sometimes he envied people who could live simple lives without headlines or boardrooms dictating their every move. Everyone thinks being a CEO means you have all the power, Adrian said, swirling the champagne in his glass. But sometimes, I feel like I have none at all. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him. You don't seem powerless. That's the trick, he said. Never let them see the cracks. She was silent for a moment, then smiled faintly. Maybe we have more in common than I thought. Midnight passed, and the tension in the room shifted. The weight of expectation lingered in the air. The wedding night, the assumption of intimacy, the pressure from families waiting to hear how the union had been consummated. Evelyn set her glass down, her expression softening. I know what tonight is supposed to mean, she said quietly. But we don't have to pretend. Not if you don't want to. Her words surprised him. She wasn't demanding, she wasn't coy. She was giving him a choice, something he hadn't been given in months. Adrian exhaled, the sharp edges of his demeanor softening for the first time. He walked closer, stopping just a step away from her. What do you want, Evelyn? He asked, his voice low. She looked up at him, her eyes clear. I want honesty. Whatever happens between us, let it be real. Not for them, not for the deal, just real. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Adrian reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into his touch, as if she had been waiting for it all night. The world outside, the family expectations, the contracts, the headlines, faded. For the first time since the wedding began, Adrian didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt something else. Something unexpected. Something dangerous. But just as the distance between them began to close, the sharp buzz of Adrian's phone cut through the silence. He pulled it from his pocket, irritation flashing across his face. A message from his father. Remember what's at stake. Do not forget why this marriage exists. Adrian's jaw tightened. Evelyn glanced at the screen, then back at him, her expression dimming. She understood. Without another word, Adrian tossed the phone aside. He met her gaze again, his voice steady but softer than before. Tonight isn't about them. Evelyn's lips parted, her breath catching. And in that suspended moment, it was clear, whatever began between them tonight would not be the hollow performance their families demanded. It would be something real. Something neither of them had seen coming. The night blurred into something Adrian hadn't expected. Not passion in the way the families assumed, not obligation either, but connection. Hours passed, and the two of them lingered in that sweet light, conspirators hiding from the world. They talked until dawn brushed faint light across the curtains, until Evelyn's laughter softened the edges of Adrian's guarded heart. It was supposed to be the start of a contract. Instead, it became the first fragile thread of something real. But reality waited outside their door. The next morning, Adrian woke to the faint rustle of papers. Evelyn sat near the window, sunlight painting her in gold. In her lap rested a stack of folders, legal documents she had brought with her. You're working already. Adrian's voice was hoarse with sleep. She glanced at him with a small smile. I thought CEOs liked early mornings. Not on the day after my wedding, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. What are those? She hesitated before answering. Contracts. My father gave them to me yesterday. They're conditions. Clauses tied to the merger between our families. Adrian sat up, frowning. What kind of clauses? She handed him the folder. As he skimmed the pages, his jaw tightened. The language was clear. Evelyn's inheritance, her access to her own trust, even her position in her father's company, all of it was tied to her obedience within this marriage. If she left Adrian, or if he annulled the marriage, she would lose everything. They built a cage for you, Adrian said, his voice hard. Her eyes dropped to her hands. I told you last night, I didn't have a choice. For a moment, anger burned hot in Adrian's chest, not at her, but at the families who treated her like a bargaining chip. He had agreed to this union for the sake of business, but seeing the chains around her wrists made it feel different. Crueler. Evelyn looked at him, her gaze steady despite the vulnerability in her voice. I need to know something, Adrian. Am I just a deal to you? Or, she trailed off, leaving the question unfinished. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood, crossed the room, and closed the folder with a snap. "You're not a deal," he said firmly. "Not to me." The weeks that followed tested that promise. At first, the marriage played out like a performance for the world. Public appearances, staged photos, polite smiles at galas. The media called them the golden couple. Shareholders praised the stability. Their families glowed with pride. But behind closed doors, Adrian and Evelyn built something different. He discovered that she was sharper than most people realized. At board dinners, she asked questions that cut to the core of deals. In private, she challenged his ideas, offered perspectives no one else dared give him. She wasn't afraid of his temper, nor his reputation. And instead of resenting her presence in his life, Adrian began to crave it. For Evelyn, the walls she had carried all her life began to crack. She painted again in the quiet hours, setting up canvases in the unused sunroom of the penthouse. Adrian found her there one evening, colors streaked across her hands, her face lit with joy. She froze when she saw him, embarrassed. But instead of mocking, he only asked, "Can I watch?" Little by little, trust grew between them. And little by little, something far more dangerous grew too. But not everyone was pleased. It began with whispers at the office. A rival executive, Mr. Lang, had noticed the change in Adrian's demeanor. "The CEO's distracted," he muttered to others. "This marriage has softened him." Then came the leak. A confidential memo about Cole Enterprises' upcoming expansion mysteriously reached the press. Stocks wavered, shareholders panicked. Adrian's boardroom became a battlefield overnight. Adrian sat at the head of the table, eyes cold, scanning the men and women around him. "Someone here is feeding information to the press. Find out who." Evelyn, seated quietly beside him as the meeting dragged on, noticed something others didn't. Lang's smug expression, the way his hand brushed over his phone beneath the table. Later, when the boardroom emptied, she leaned toward Adrian. "It's him," she whispered. "Lang, I saw it." Adrian's brows furrowed. "You're sure?" She nodded. Positive. Trusting her instinct, Adrian had Lang investigated. Within days, the truth surfaced. Lang had been working with a competitor, undermining Adrian from within. Without Evelyn's sharp eye, Adrian might have missed it entirely. That night, after Lang's removal, Adrian found her in the sunroom again. He stepped closer, watching her paint. "You saved me today," he said quietly. She looked up, a streak of blue across her cheek. "I just noticed what you didn't." He studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You don't know how rare that is. To have someone I can actually rely on." Their eyes locked, and something shifted between them. No longer just trust, but something deeper, magnetic, undeniable. Adrian reached for her hand, paint-stained and trembling, and pressed it to his chest. "Evelyn," he whispered. Her breath caught, and in that instant, she realized she was no longer pretending to be his wife. She was his wife. But love rarely comes without a price. Evelyn's father discovered her growing influence over Adrian, and he did not approve. One evening, he arrived unannounced at their penthouse, his presence as suffocating as ever. "You're forgetting your place," he told her sharply when Adrian stepped out of the room. "This marriage was meant to strengthen our families, not to give you ideas above your station." Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. "I'm not just a pawn. I won't let you use me like one." Her father's voice turned cold. "Defy me, and I'll cut you off. You'll have nothing." Unseen, Adrian stood at the doorway, listening. His chest tightened with fury. For years, he had endured manipulations, demands, and obligations. But hearing her father threaten her lit a fire he hadn't felt before. He stepped forward, his voice like steel. "If she has nothing, then so do I. Because I don't care about your deals anymore. I care about her." Evelyn's father turned, stunned. "You'd throw away everything for this girl." Adrian's gaze was unyielding. "For my wife," he corrected. "Yes." The fallout was immediate. Evelyn's father pulled funding from joint ventures. Rumors spread that Cole Enterprises was in jeopardy. The board questioned Adrian's judgment. But Adrian didn't waver. With Evelyn by his side, he fought harder than ever, restructuring deals, securing independent investors, and proving to his board that loyalty and love didn't make him weaker, they made him unstoppable. And through it all, Evelyn never left his side. She became not just his partner in name, but in every battle he fought. Her sharp observations saved millions. Her presence steadied him in moments of doubt. One night, after a brutal week of negotiations, Adrian returned home to find Evelyn asleep on the couch, paintbrush still in her hand, a canvas half finished before her. He stood there for a long time, watching her, realizing how deeply she had changed him. She hadn't just become his wife. She had become his anchor. The true test came months later, when another merger threatened their empire. Adrian was cornered, pressured to compromise his values. Shareholders urged him to bend, to play the game as before. But Evelyn stood with him in the boardroom, her voice calm but unwavering. "You don't need to bow to them. You're stronger when you choose your own path." Her words steadied him, and with her hand in his, Adrian made the boldest decision of his career, one that risked everything but secured their future on their own terms. The gamble paid off. Cole Enterprises not only survived but thrived, stronger than ever. The press no longer spoke of a forced marriage. They spoke of the power couple who defied expectations. On the anniversary of their wedding, Adrian returned to the same suite where it all began, the roses, the candles, the champagne. But this time, nothing felt staged. He took Evelyn's hand, pulling her close, his voice low. "Do you remember that first night?" She smiled softly. "How could I forget? I thought I was trapped," he admitted. "But you turned it into something else. Something I didn't believe in anymore." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "And what's that?" He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "Love." And as their lips met, Adrian knew the truth. The cage he had once despised had opened into a doorway. Not into obligation, not into duty, but into a love story he never saw coming, one he would spend the rest of his life writing with her.